Okay, thank you everybody. I'm taking over now as the chairman interviewer, and Esther will answer the questions. So a slight correction, I think, to what Adriana has just said. We didn't organize the local Ebola response. We simply documented it and then made that information available to the international community who were mounting a major response against the Ebola epidemic in the 3 countries most affected. And our work is pretty well limited to Sierra Leone, but many of the things that we'll say or discuss now will apply also to the other 2 countries that were seriously affected by the 2014 epidemic. So I'm going to kick off straight away by saying that Esther was one of the people that was included in the nomination for the International Impact Prize of the Economic and Social Research Council, which is a research funding body in UK. And every year they give a prize for international development work. And they chose something called ERAP, which was the Ebola Response Anthropology Platform. And it was a response by anthropologists and others who knew Sierra Leone to try and get information into the public domain so that it could be used by Ebola responders. So it was an online blog, basically, but it was also a kind of great dump for papers and information that we had. And some people submitted published items. Some people simply wrote from scratch little pieces that they thought were important to convey information. I remember writing one piece. I got up at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was very angry about the way people were talking about hidden secret burials and how these Africans were hiding the dead, and this is causing the spread of the epidemic. So by 9 o'clock I'd written a 3-pager called "Do Funerals Cause Ebola?" ? And then that appeared later that day on the blog. And the blog was read by, I think there were 30,000 visits during the Ebola epidemic, and it was used extensively by Ebola responders as a major source of information. So the Economic and Social Research Council had provided the money to run this blog, and then when they looked at the projects that they've been supporting, they gave the prize for 2016 to the Ebola Response Anthropology Platform. And Esther was one of those people that were part of the platform and went to London to receive the prize. So I want to ask her first to say a bit about the Ebola Response Anthropology Platform. You're not an anthropologist, Esther, but you were invited to take part, I think, because you're writing a PhD in development economics, but also because you're a Sierra Leonean, and there were few people accessible at the time in London to the platform to attend meetings. So you went along and, as it were, represented the national community on the platform. Would you like to say a bit about, or I'd like to ask you to say a little bit about what that involved, what were the meetings like, and what kind of interactions did you have with the people who were listening to the advice that the platform was giving?
Thank you, Paul. In the meeting, I was surprised to be invited, because I was thinking that as a local lady, I'm not important, or what role should I play with academic people, with professors, and Chris Whitty and so forth. So I was really...
Who's Chris Whitty?
Chris Whitty is he's the, what?
Okay, he was the Chief Medical Advisor to the Cabinet Office, which is the advisory group that sits around the British Prime Minister. So I think he was actually the Chief Medical Advisor to the development, the aid programme, but he was reporting directly to the Cabinet Office in Downing Street. So any advice about Ebola, he's a professor of epidemiology from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So he was seconded to the British government to advise on Ebola. And he was one of the, let me just explain the background. He requested then that when the platform was founded, that we would form a subcommittee that would meet with him on, I think, 3 or 4 occasions to give direct advice so that he could ask us questions back and forth. He wasn't just reading like everyone else or tapping comments back in. He wanted us to come and sit around a table with him, just like this. And he was at one end and Esther was at the other.
So I was so nervous, let me tell you. So I don't know what I was doing there. I was talking and so forth, nervous, everything, with everything in my head. So we are discussing about ETU and so forth, how
Ebola treatment units.
Ebola treatment unit, that they are going to put it in the main in the provincial country, provincial towns, Freetown, Bo, and so forth. So they will transport everybody with the Ebola virus to those places. So I was telling him, I said, well, something might be happening in the home and so forth. What, have you thought of anything? He said, no, they will just, there are ambulances and so forth. So with my experience working in those communities, in the villages, in, let me say, in the forest region, because I've done baseline survey for the Gola Forest and also for Liberia Gola Forest, that region between the boundaries of Liberia and so forth, because therein you have to walk, let me say, 8 hours on foot without no water and so forth, and villages are there. So I was thinking about those people. I said, Chris, I've been working in those communities. How do you think that they're going to transport those people from that village to there, and there's no vehicle, and they have to use hammock? So how do you, at least when somebody is sick, they have to give the person something at home before ever they transport it. They said there will be no home care. I said, okay, well, there should be home care at least, because in order for somebody to work, it's a long distance. So it was a confrontation scene. He talks, then I will say, no, please let there be something that we were still seeing that there's no home care. We'll make sure that there will be no home care. So I just kept quiet. I was crying. Then I said, okay, if there be the case, that time everything is coming. False, let me say, false rumor. We are talking how people are licking their bodies, dead bodies, and so forth.
Kissing corpses.
Yeah, and so forth. And the local people were saying also that the ETUs are there to harvest dead bodies.
Organs, harvest organs from dead bodies.
And eating something like that. I said, oh, something is getting out of hand. I said, let me go in, because as a researcher, I said, let me go and see things. Because rumors sometimes are good and sometimes are bad. As a researcher, you always have to stand on your ground. So I volunteered to go. So that's how the situation was.
No, Chris Whitty shut you up by saying, Esther, you better go to Sierra Leone and report back.
Yeah. So so when I volunteered that I want to go, so they said, okay, you go. So I was not afraid to go. But others were saying, oh, when I said I would like to go there, so everybody, they were watching, shocked, looking at me. They said, oh God, this one, when she goes, she's never going to come back. I said, look at you, I bet you. So I went there, so I spoke to the people.
Mm-hmm. And what did you find?
Oh God.
Well, shall we narrow it down to the issue of home care?
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is villages that, particularly we were worried at that stage about villages that were in the interior, because we've been working around the Gola Forest, and as Esther's explained, those places are very inaccessible. And so then we had a little diversion. I said to Chris Whitty, I said, does the British government have access to helicopters? Because the British Army was being sent to Sierra Leone, the American Army was sent to Liberia, the British Army was sent to Sierra Leone. I said, will they go with helicopters? So fortunately, I had a former master's student in anthropology who was actually working in the Ministry of Defence, and she was being asked to coordinate the Ebola response for the British Army. She was providing them with kind of basic information. So she'd come to Esther and myself. I remember we had a coffee in a Starbucks on Trafalgar Square, and then she invited us back to the Ministry of Defence. And it took us about 2 hours to get through the security procedures and so on, but finally we got to her office and she said, I've got bad news for you, because I'd asked about helicopters. They said the British Army is short of helicopters, most of them are in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the rest of them are broken, and we can't afford the spare parts or something. So there will not be helicopters for extracting patients from remote locations in Sierra Leone. So then we went back and said, okay, well, obviously what Esther is saying is really serious. Access is a #1 problem, and putting down 5 or 10 large-scale Ebola treatment units that are like 100 miles from most of the patients, that's going to be a problem, because moving the patient will spread the disease, and you've got to do something better. And if there's going to be no home care, what are the alternatives? So you went and you did surveys,
Yeah.
and some results then came out about people's access to medical facilities and so on.
Yeah, yeah. So I went twice. The first one was when I had this body language with Chris Whitty. He was firing me, I was firing him. He was sitting over there, and we are exchanging talks and so forth. So I don't know, some people, I don't know, Paul was just looking at me like that. I was just, I don't know. I was
Inspired.
Inspired. So we are talking and so forth. I was just looking straight into his eyes. So he volunteered. So I volunteered to go. So I went. I said, okay, there are two ways to talk to these community people. One is through go into the community, talk to everybody. But if I want to get my family, I will call it, they are my family, to talk to my family, I'm a village girl. When we want to talk secrets, when we want to talk serious things, we know where we should go and talk. So I volunteered. So I said, these are my methodology. So I went there. I said, I'm going to use the secret society. One secret society and the other one general people. But I focus on the secret society, because then when you get those people, everything will be settled. So I said, okay, I'm going to use the secret society, one for men, one for women. So I had various research assistants. So I knew those who are members and those who are not. So I picked my best RAs to the research assistants. So I went there. So as soon as I was texting, communicating with them. Not that when you are in the field, after you've got your information, you forget about those things. Every time when I'm in here, I communicate with them. How are you? How is your family? How are they doing? So there's that relationship, mutual relationship with us. So I said, I'm coming. Oh, everybody said, Mommy, we are here. We are ready to go in wherever we say. I said, hang on. So when I went, I just picked the ones that I want to talk to. So I picked them. We sat down. I said, this is the situation on the ground. I said, when you go into this community, you are not going to tell them. Let them tell you. It's a way round. Before, when you go, you ask them questions and they answer. This time, we are going to turn it around. When you go, let them ask you, let them answer. You ask them questions. No, let them ask you questions, you answer. I said, that's how we did things. So when there, the men went that way, we went that way. And when we went, we are doing, that was it. So we are doing we are doing the quantitative interview and the qualitative.
Or a questionnaire and a focus group.
Yeah, focus group. So I was concentrating on the focus group more, because the focus group therein, I use the societal things. So while the other areas are busy with that, with the quantitative, we are busy with the qualitative. So we went, we spoke. I told them that we are not going to talk about the society. I say, as a member, I'm proud to be a member of my secret society. I say, as a member, I have no right to say about you. I say, if you hear me talking about your secret society, sue me. Oh, that made them to relax. I say, I've got them. So they were relaxed. We went there, and the simple question I asked them, my dear, I said, what do you do when somebody has malaria, chicken pox, measles in your community? And they said, well, isolate them. How do you do it? Well, put them over there. When we want to give them food, we just push it like that. I said, very good. And they explain things. And it's similar to the Ebola prevention. So when somebody has, I say, what happens? Because I said, we discussed this yesterday in class. And what happens if somebody dies or you don't, how do you wash your cups? And they told me, because even if you have sickness, you are sick or what, but when they are washing cups, even the normal the dead people in town, when they are washing you, they don't use their hands. They use cloth to wash the dead body. Even in town, not because you are a member of a secret or you have infection, you are dead of that or tuberculosis and so forth. They use cloth. I said, how do you prevent yourself from not using the water by not touching the water? They said, well, we can use plastic bag. I said, well, you've answered the question. I said, this is all what Ebola is about, my dears. And they said, oh, we never knew. And these people, they come with this megaphone. They were just telling us.
Scaring them.
It's scary. We should not do this. Nobody came and told us that. Told us how to prevent what and so forth. I said, well, you people, you knew. I said, that's why when I come to your communities, I don't want you to tell me that you are, oh, we don't know book and so forth. I said, I said, my mother, if you write A like Sierra Leone, she will never pronounce it. But now she's well educated. I said, because she has educated us, we can read and write. And when we come into your community, from your knowledge, therein we can write something. I said, I don't like you to tell me that, oh, I'm not educated. I said, you are more educated than even the president. I said, let everybody go and tell the president. I said, without you, there will be war in this country, there will be famine and so forth. I said, because of your knowledge, that's why we are happy in the country. And that's one opened their eyes.
Okay, so that was the technique for learning from the people.
Yeah.
And you found that already they had a great deal of knowledge about how to deal with the sort of situation that they were now faced with.
Yeah.
And you encouraged them to apply that knowledge that they already had to Ebola, and that became an effective way of reducing the epidemic in these areas. But we still haven't got to the explanation about how to deal with the problem of the long distances that patients were being expected to be transported by pinning all the emphasis in the international response on these large Ebola treatment units. Anyone that saw my lecture, listened to my lecture yesterday evening, I showed the remains of one of these Ebola treatment units to show the amount of concrete that was poured into them. They were very, solid constructions. They were biofortifications. They were like military fortifications, except against a biological agent. They were very hard to enter. They were protected by, in fact, by armed guards, and families couldn't reach them, either because the distance was so great or because when they got there, they were simply turned away. They would take the patient into the facility. That was the last they would see them. And in the early days, up to 70% of patients were dying. So the next thing the family would hear, they'd go back home 100 miles away. If they were lucky, they would hear something. In some cases, they never heard again. They don't know to this day where their patients were. And the patients were buried in the Ebola treatment centers, and it became a very negative thing because people said, we're not going to take our victims to the ETUs because they will simply disappear and we'll never know what will happen to them. These are death camps. So that was the problem. That was why people then wouldn't commit people who were sick, because Ebola and malaria is indistinguishable in the first 3 days. So there's a lot of malaria in Sierra Leone and not very much Ebola. And if you got malaria, then they would take you along to one of these ETCs and admit you, and people feared that they would be cross-infected. Even when they'd done the blood test, they might find that it was a case of malaria, not Ebola, but by then it's too late. They would have been infected with Ebola. So they started to take patients to local herbalists, to take them into the interior where they're harder to reach, and that multiplied the epidemic, that boosted the epidemic. So we still, and as I say, we asked about helicopters, and we were told it's not possible that the response in Sierra Leone would be able to have helicopters as ambulances. The British Army had a couple of helicopters, but that was just to ferry supplies and personnel. So we're still dealing with Chris Whitty's problem that he doesn't want home care because he thinks that people will not do it well enough. They won't protect themselves. He didn't know about the plastic bags and the folk models of infection prevention that Esther came back with. And he's thinking, well, now what do we do about the problem that Esther's posed, which is the distance and the difficulty of getting these patients. Our surveys had shown that it took typically 3 days for a patient with malaria for the family to decide they were so sick they needed to be taken to a medical facility. After 3 days, Ebola becomes what they call a wet disease. People are vomiting. The first 3 days, it's a high fever and a headache. And then day 4, typically people die on the 6th day. Day 4, 5, and 6, they're vomiting, they've got diarrhea, all their body fluids, eye fluid, nose fluid, and so on. These are highly infectious. And people typically will not send a malaria patient to a medical facility until 3 days have elapsed because they know that many cases resolve themselves spontaneously. So we're still faced with this big problem of there's going to be no home care, according to Professor Whitty, But at the same time, that would make it almost impossible to get a patient from a distant village to one of these biofortresses. So there had to be some compromise at that point. And you were involved in that compromise.
Yeah, so well, later, I think, while I was in the field, to talk to these societal people and also doing the data collection and so forth, I think Chris Whitty went to Freetown, and he went to Cambia. Cambia shares the border with Guinea and so forth. And there's one issue, the Ebola Treatment Center in Potloko. So he went to Cambia, and he drove from Cambia and back and forth, something like that. So he found out that this distance is a tar road, but the distance is long.
No, it's not. He found it's 20 miles.
It's 20
but it's long for local people.
Yeah, it's long for local people. And if, for instance, if I'm living in Cambia, one of the remote villages in Cambia, I've never been to Potloko. I have no one there. So for me to take me from my village while I'm sick, the distance will just kill me. I will say that there's no need for me to leave, because my family is not with me. I'm leaving my loved ones over there. So he found that when Chris Whitty went, he went and found out that even that 20 or how many miles from Cambia to Potloko or Potloko to Cambia is very long for any sick person. So, and especially in Sierra Leone, as how Paul has said, if you have malaria, the local people, we don't go to hospital because you have malaria. At times they just rub medical leaves on you, hit you, put local herbs in the pot, and sit down and steam yourself. They think that you will sweat. When you sweat, the malaria is gone. So I see why people are resistant to bring their people to even to go to the nearest medical centers. So people were saying, okay, in 2 days' time, that person is just malaria, just got fever, just make their hands on you. Okay, this is our thermometer. We just put in our hands. Okay, this is 30 minutes, this is 20. Well, just leave 2-3 days till we get up. Or they just give you some herbs and drink it, and that's one kills the malaria. So when Chris Whitty came back, he said, okay, I don't know what he said, but I thought he said, okay, what we have been discussing, this confrontation is right. So, okay, let me make a decision. Let's bring the hospital closer to the community, where it will triage the malaria, other sickness, and so forth. And while I was in the field, people were telling me that, why we don't want to take our people to this hospital? And then somebody goes, probably he has hernia. And when you go, they say you have Ebola. There's no way they can tell us that this is Ebola or malaria. And also Lassa fever is in the country. Lassa fever and Ebola is similar. The same vomiting, the wet period, and so forth. So people were confused, really. So when you go, there was no triage. So they brought the ETUs and the CCC, the Community Care Center, closer to the community. That one, at least, it has reduced the distance. So there we are now, Community Care Center closer to people. So when you come, they triage you. So they check your temperature. If you have
take your
blood samples, they take it to the lab. And if they found out that you have hernia, they can say, okay, go, or it's just my ordinary fever or what, or painkiller, they give it to you and go. And people, we are feeding them. That's what people told me. So he decided to reduce from the higher to the lower, to bring the center closer to the community.
Can you describe a CCC for us, a community care center?
So the community care center is made out of local materials. Tarpaulin, we call it tarpaulin, probably that's what they call it in Europe, here, a developed country. It's a plastic thing you put over something. It's made out of local materials. So people we are using local material, nails and so forth. And they even train local people from the villages to be cleaners, they cook food for these people. And in the ETU, you can the CCC, you can stand at its distance because it's made out of sticks and so forth. So you can stand over there outside. I'm inside there as an Ebola patient. Somebody who is over there will wave to me, and I will wave to that person. We identify it's my father, my brother, my cousin. We say, be careful, we love you, and so forth. And those, in fact, working in the CCC will go out. Well, I would say if somebody is working in here, I would say, when you go, tell my husband that I'm now feeling better, or can he send, or they send me pepper soup. They were allowing local food to come into the CCC, and they allow local people to bring food and feed the sick ones in the house. So the people found the CCC as their own societal bush. Because the CCC, they found it, because it's over there, and it's local Sierra Leone. If you are not a member of the OJ, look, let me just say the OJ, those who are coming from another secret society, let me say the OJ. The OJ is in a bigger town. If you are not a member of the OJ, you will never be there. So the people found this ETU as the OJ. So now that they brought it there, so they found that, oh, the OJ is where we are part of CCC. We are part of, it's our society. It's closer to us, and we are a member of it because our brothers and sisters are working with it. So that made them to relax, and because they were feeding them, the environment was conducive for them. Not by going there whenever you want to go, they have to point gun on your face, or the distance. That's all they showed. There are so many information people highlighted to us.
So they took ownership of the CCC,
in a sense,
and that helps them bring patients more quickly and so on.
Yeah.
Okay, so there were 55 of these CCCs, and I think the first one was opened in the middle of November 2014, and by end of January there were now 55 CCs exactly placed ahead of where the new cases were appearing. So rather than pin all their hopes on these large ETUs, which had transportation problems, and they looked very far and distant and threatening, there was now a network of these local CCCs with 8 beds in a stick-built, tarpaulin-covered kind of centre. Sometimes they repurposed primary schools and so on.
Yeah.
But they were all in villages, and village people had ownership. So you actually went a second time to Sierra Leone. You came back just before Christmas in December with all the data that showed that the problem was real, and you'd assessed whether or not you could use local methods, and a very positive signal from institutions like the local secret societies that they could be part of the Ebola response. That was all posted then to the Ebola Response Anthropology platform practically as quickly as my fingers could type it up. But you then went back in early February 2015.
Yeah.
Why did you go back?
At that time, the Brunic team went and made a research about the CCC itself, and they found out that 30% of the CCC, because they've established the CCC, 30% of the epidemic has gone down. Well,
let's talk about that in a moment. That was an evaluation study that was done after the CCCs, but you went earlier than that. The Proning paper didn't come out until 2016, but you were there in February 2015 while the epidemic was still raging. And the money came from I don't know now, from the British. No, it came from the British government. It came from DFID.
DFID.
Because DFID wanted to know how well Chris Whitty's policy was working, so they invited you to be part of a small team that went back to assess the effectiveness of the CCCs.
Yeah.
And you took the team went and did various things, so they talked to the agencies and so on and so forth, but you particularly took charge of the actual CCCs themselves. You went to visit them in the bush, in these remote villages where they were now placed, to ask people how well they were performing. So tell us how that went.
Oh gosh, can I remember that one? So when the second time they asked me to go, because that's the time the Brunic, because while we were on the ground, while we were in Freetown, we went to a presentation wherein they have to present their findings. So the Brunic, they found out that 30% of the epidemic has gone down because of the CCC. So I don't know why did they say, I don't know why really they told.
No, I think you're talking about two different papers. That was a Columbia team that did that first. But it was a very rapid assessment, and it didn't have any village level detail. because they never visited any of the villages where the CCCs were. They collected all the data from the Ministry of Health and so on, but there was a need for village-based data. The paper by Pronink and colleagues, which appeared in 2016, I can give you references if anyone wants to read that, and that's a formal epidemiological assessment with a lot of quantification that measured the impact of the CCCs, but that didn't happen until late 2015. But you went and actually studied the CCCs in action. You went to 7 places?
Yeah, we went to 7 places. So that was the time they asked us to go and evaluate the CCC. So during that, when we went, the same thing again. I don't know why did they ask me to take part in that. So I never asked, because I was so desperate to go and help my country and see really the centers. And we went to some places with live Ebola cases. We went there, and I didn't go into it, but I saw it at night. There are lights, and we are talking to these people, collecting data and so forth. So we went there also. The difference, well, probably you will try to say, this trip, it was really with the RAs and so forth. I have to the same method. I told them that we are going again to talk to know really what is happening with this CCC. What are the advantages and disadvantages of this CCC to the local people? And also that's one also we did some focus group discussions, and people told us various things. I was, for example, I was in a village, we are in a remote village in Kono. So we went to places where really there is life, as I've said already. So we went to a village in Kono. We stayed in a village. So the man's son had fever. So everybody was scared. I was not scared. So the man took the son to the nearest CCC. So the next time the man came back while we are still talking to communities and so forth. I said, what happened to the younger man? He said, no, he's still admitted. So they've taken his blood samples and so forth. So I said, are you worried? He said, no, I'm not worried. He said, I know that they will take care of him, because since it is here and we walked over there, I have the belief that since he has walked, I know that he will come back. So the next day before then we left for another place to walk. So I phoned him. Then he said, I asked him, he said, well, the sample has gone, nothing is wrong with him. So that's
thank God.
Yeah. So.
But I mean, the point you're making is that showed the degree of acceptance. In just 3 months, we'd gone from a situation in which people were not allowing anyone who had a high fever to go anywhere near an Ebola treatment center because they were scared they'd never see them again, to a situation in which they so accepted the local community care center that the chief wasn't afraid for his son to go there with a high fever, knowing that they were doing the blood tests very quickly, knowing that there was treatment for other sicknesses like malaria and typhoid, and that he could track everything that was going on. If he was doubtful about his son, if they had to admit his son, he could go there and he could literally see into the CCC and talk to the son. Whereas if the ETU was 100 miles away, he would never afford the bus fare, he would never be allowed by the guards even to approach the so-called red zone, which you didn't go into because that was biosafety protocol and so on. So that's the evidence, that's part of the evidence that you came back with, that the CCCs were being well accepted locally. Mm-hmm. So then what did you do with this information? What happened next?
What do you mean by what happened next? I came back.
Yes, you came back alive, thank God.
I came back, then we wrote our reports, and we found out people were interested in what we are talking. They were telling us, they told us what is wrong with the CCC, what was wrong with the ETU, and they were telling us the various disadvantage, what they were doing with their bodies when they take them to the ETU and so forth. And they were telling us that when they are, especially the people, we are more concerned about burial, because burial is very important in the society. Because when an elder, let me say an elder, a well-known somebody who has a position like chiefs, youth leader, something, women's leader, and so forth, when when this person died, they have to, or somebody who is 70, 80 years old. So when somebody dies, that's the last time somebody wants to see them, the family. So they want to give good last respect to them. And the community, the government were sending, what's the name of these people now?
Burial teams.
Burial teams. And these burial teams are local people, although they are local people, but they are from various regional areas. They couldn't speak the language and so forth. People were against that. So they said, why can't they train us? We know our people, we know our family. That is our family. Those are societal people, and some people who are going there, the Mendema will call it Poa. That means you are not part of the society. Why can they allow these people to work? They say, well, let them give us the suit. We can give last respect to our what? We are not leaking body and so forth. It's the way the Muslims and the Christians, also the religious things came inside. The Muslim, there's a special way they bury their dead. The Christian also have their way of burying. So these people, these imported helpers who come into the community, they just go and dump the body. As a Christian or as a Muslim, we have to pray on our corpse before we lay them. There's a way towards the sun and so forth. There's a method wherein we can bury. So they were against those type of things when the burial teams, people are inside, they allow them to come out. And at times, as Paul said, at times it takes 2 or 3 days before ever this burial teams comes. And when they come, there's no, the heat. We don't have fridge, we don't have quartz, we have to put without mortuaries and so forth. So before they come, the body has gone by. So people, ask my mother, let me say my mother just passed out. I see my mother lying down there, getting what to be disgraced. My dear, I will put my hand there. So that's why my mother, when this is not part of the talk, but I was thinking, when my mother, 2 months or 3 months ago, she died in my hand. I was taking her, putting her. I said, oh, my mother. I was taking her, putting her on my lap. I said, oh God, thanks be to God. This was not during Ebola. If she never had Ebola. That's what the people we are going through. You see your loved one, you want to help, but you can't. You say, I don't care, let me die. Because we believe in blessing. And Ebola is against that. Anybody who wants to have blessing, that's the time the Ebola strike you. So Ebola came against the culture of any community.
So I think probably now we'll see whether there's any questions, but I'll just make the closing comment that this was all part of the Ebola Response Anthropology platform. The second visit, the report was online very quickly, within a few weeks. And I think Andriana's probably exaggerating about the impact that we had, because other people were doing similar things and making similar discoveries. And the country director of the World Health Organization, Dr. Anders Nordstrom, had found out by that stage that this burial problem was a real issue, and he was spreading the message around that you need to listen to local communities and so on. So it was parallel discovery, shall we say, but Esther's work was obviously part of what influenced that shift. And one of the big changes that occurred as the Ebola epidemic went down was that agencies like WHO started to call not for safe burial. Safe burial had been the slogan from August 2014. So, it doesn't matter how you bury the corpse, do it safely. And I remember one outraged villager describing to me how these town-based burial teams actually did the burial. They say they come with a cart, they put the body in 2 body bags, and then they push it with sticks. They don't even pick it and lift it and put it in the grave. They just take the cart to the grave, upend it, and then push the body with sticks. They said, how can we live with that? So then the international community formally announced that it was no longer just safe burial, but it was safe and respectful burial. And that was a key change that this type of work contributed to. And that, in the end, I think, helped end the epidemic.